you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh gosh, I'm just so happy to see you here this morning. My name is Janio. I'm the faculty coordinator from Santa Ana College, and I'm also the founder of these talks. And I have a pleasure to be joined by my colleagues, and I'll let them introduce themselves in just a minute. Amanda Tainter, Enrique Jauregui, and Tricia Willigin from Long Beach City College. Guys, could you please say hello, Amanda?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Amanda Tainter from Reedley College in the Central Valley of California. I am the SLO coordinator over here.
Enrique
Jauregui, the SLO coordinator for Fresno City College in the Central Valley.
Tricia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tricia Wilging. I'm the SLO coordinator at Long Beach City College. Great to be with you all.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
And Bethany.
Oh, Bethany's here. Good morning. Oh, Bethany just joined us.
I did. I just jumped in. I always forget to register myself. So
let's go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Bethany Tasaka. I'm the outcomes faculty lead from San Bernardino Valley College.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you very much. Before we introduce our guests today, Amanda, would you please guide us through the Padlet setup? We have a special feature for today's talk with questions from the audience, please.
Sure, yeah, I'm going to put the Padlet link in the chat, and we've created different categories. If you want to add some questions to those categories in the Padlet, you can. If the category is not there, or you just say, I don't know where this belongs, there's also another option, but you can just add your questions underneath the Padlet. You can always put your questions in the chat, but we love using the Padlet because then it saves them, and we have them for future, either for Bryan or for other SLO talks that we have. If you have any questions, you can just message me in the chat as well, and I can guide you through. If you have problem accessing, let me know, but we appreciate your contributions to this talk this morning.
All right, thank you again. And here's a message for everyone who is attending today's workshop, webinar. Please make sure that you introduce yourself, say hello in the chat, and use it to ask questions as well. So with that, our guest this morning is Bryan Alexander. He's an award-winning, internationally known futurist, researcher, writer, speaker, consultant, most importantly, teacher working in the field of higher education's future. Bryan is currently a senior scholar at Georgetown University and teaches graduate seminars in their Learning, Design, and Technology program. His upcoming new book, Universities on Fire, Education in the Climate Crisis, addresses the question of how higher education as a system responsible for the public good has addressed crisis in the past and what it can and should do in the very near yet very uncertain future. Good morning, Bryan. Thank you so much for joining us. Speaking of climate change, Amanda just informed us that her college is on a flood watch in danger of being shut down. That's Central California. What's the weather like in your neck of the woods?
Well, it's not quite as Californian. I'm coming to you from the Washington, D.C. area where it is dreary. It's been drizzly. The skies are locked up with clouds, and the temperature is, I'm guessing, around 45 Fahrenheit. So, Amanda, where is your institution?
We are in the Central Valley of California, and so we have got some robust rivers. The Kings River, which is one of our large, runs right by our institution. So that's what we're looking at is that overflowing into our sewer system. So we're just watching it.
Oh my gosh, please take care.
Yes.
Are you considering emergency remote instruction, sending everybody home?
Yeah, that's what they're looking at to see what the implications are. We have a high school on our campus as well. So just what the implications for that are. So far it's holding strong, and they're just watching it. So we're pretty lucky so far.
Well, good luck, Amanda. Good luck.
Thank you.
Right on. Well, thank you so much again. Please, for those who are coming in, make sure that you introduce yourself and tell us about perhaps your weather condition in your area. Today's Friday SLO talk is focused on the future of higher education in general, teaching and learning in particular. In anticipation of the vigorous discussion, please make sure that you use the tablet and you ask questions in the chat as well. And here we are to discuss the future with the futurist. What's next, Bryan? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm first of all, thank you, Jarek, for hosting me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And thank you to everybody for giving the supreme gift of your attention and your time, which I greatly appreciate. And thank you to Amanda for setting up the Padlet and for answering my question about this. My plan for the next period of time is to show you some results from my research, and at the same time to engage you in conversation, because I can really just talk to myself happily, and I can also make a video of this and make it available. But I would love to hear your thoughts and your questions as we go, and I'll pause and ask, and also I'll try and keep an eye on both the Padlet and the chat as I go. Shout out to St. Louis there. Jen Shepard knows what I'm talking about. If you haven't been to St. Louis, there's a fantastic museum with a completely dull name of the City Museum. It's extraordinary. It's one of the most unusual museums in the world, and I highly recommend it. And hello to everybody else who is coming from across the country. Lisa, I hope you're staying just warm enough to be pleasant there. And E. Simon Hansen, I hope everything is okay out there. I'm just reading about the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank there, so I hope everyone's okay. The whole scope of the future of education is enormous, and what I'd like to do is to give you a sense of where I think things are headed right now. And so let me just begin by sharing a few slides in your direction. Can you all see this? Should be a big slab of a colorful university. All right, thank you, thank you. So this is always the question that futurists get to explore, is where things are coming next. And it's interesting to ask people what they think a futurist does. You've probably seen this meme, and I get different versions of this. People accuse me of having magical powers, and I'll give you one instance of that later on. People think that I spend a lot of time looking at technology, which is true. And then there's also this, you can see on the bottom left what my family thinks I do, and that's a really open question. But what I believe I do is on the bottom right and the bottom middle, is that I try to assemble the pieces of the puzzle of what's happening next. And to do that, I conduct an awful lot of work. I write scholarly books. Academia Next is my previous book, came out in 2020. I also do a lot of blogging, a lot of article writing, and then every week I host the Future Trends Forum, which is a live video conversation about the future of higher education. Each session involves a terrific guest. At least one of you here has been such a guest, and I recommend this to everybody. No PowerPoint presentation, just thoughtful questions and answers and dialogue. I also publish a monthly analysis of the trends reshaping higher education. That's what I was speaking to in just a minute. And these trends are pretty rich. There's about 100 of them that I track, and they fall into a few different buckets. One of them is what I call education and its context. So changes within universities and colleges, and also the forces outside, everything from legal changes to policy to economics and demographics. And then I take a look at technology and how the world of technology is changing, which is obviously an enormous field with quite a bit going on. And then I mash these together to see how technology and education connect. Sometimes that's formal in the sense of educational technology, and sometimes it appears in other ways, such as impacts on the curriculum. So to get rolling, I want to take you through some of the big trends. And these are all grounded in research. These are all grounded in the present and in recent history. And then I want to kind of hit play on them or fast forward and see where they might be taking us. So again, as I go, please feel free to think about any connections that individual trends have with your work or with your life, and as well to have any questions. Now, I'd like to start with the biggest possible picture, and I'm also going to end on a very big picture. So to begin, let's take a look at internationalization of higher education. And this can often be a kind of cliche where people talk about how we are more global, we are more connected than ever before, and there's a lot of truth to that. But I want to drill down to some specifics. We have a major push to internationalize higher education, and this occurs at a few different levels. We have, or we had until 2016, a large number of students moving across national boundaries. We also had a whole bunch of faculty collaborating with faculty in other countries and doing research. And there was also a kind of programmatic push to have the curricula of individual institutions reflect global natures of knowledge, everything from languages to religions to history. And all of that is kind of culminating what you could imagine of a international university, where you set foot on it and you'll experience all number of languages, of cuisines, ways of knowing. And this is all one powerful model that's out there. And you'll see this in almost every country in the world. But one of the ways that trends work is they follow kind of Newtonian physics, that every trend tends to elicit an opposite trend, a countervailing force. And we've seen this here, what I've called the national college idea. And this is the idea that a university or college should, instead of being global, it should reflect and honor local ways of knowing, local cultures, local needs. And you can see this in some ways with things like community colleges, which are incredibly finely attuned to local workforce needs. But you can see it play out in a few other ways, sometimes politically, where you have national or local leaders who want their higher education to be more nationalistic or to respond to local religious traditions. And you can also see this play out in just operations of a university. So right now around the world, the language of scholarship and language of instruction is increasingly English, but there are universities and colleges that have started to resist that. We've seen this in Europe, we've seen this in Africa, where nations will say, all right, if you want to study here, you should do us the favor of learning the language so that you can, enjoy all of that and appreciate all of that as well. So I think we should expect to see these two trends bash back and forth across each other as the years unwind. Now, one problem with all this is that internationalization slowed down in 2016 for the US and then took a huge hit with a pandemic. In fact, some nations, Australia namely, lost a huge number of international students, and we're still in many ways recovering. The US has the extra problem that our violent crime is widely reported and scares the heck out of people around the world. Plus, the Trump administration gave us a bad reputation for welcoming migrants of all kinds. So it's been harder for the US to scramble back to our numbers of international students. It's an open question of how far we'll be able to go. Now, a second big picture issue that we want to think about as we think about where higher education is headed is really geopolitics, which might sound a little strange, especially if you think of higher education as an ivory tower or kind of protected from the world. But this is really starting to have an impact. Right now, perhaps the biggest geopolitical fact is the rising tension between the United States and China. And this is not new. This is at least 12 years old in terms of formal federal policy. But both nations are seeking to, among other things, compete with each other, and in so doing, to bring in as much of the world on their side as possible. So China, as you can see here from the schematic, has built its enormous One Belt, One Road, a combination of economic and political connections across Central Asia into Africa and into Europe. And alongside that, there are also academic connections and possibilities. Meanwhile, the United States has been building a series of global alliances to counter China. Now, why does this matter for education? Well, first of all, we've seen different moves happening at federal, state, and local levels in the US to try to counter perceptions of Chinese influence. This can involve closing Confucius institutes, most of which have closed by now. This can also involve prosecution, and we've seen a whole spate of high-profile prosecutions of Chinese academics in the United States, accusing them of different problems ranging from corruption to being part of the Chinese government. We should also expect to see this play out in the curriculum. I've heard interesting murmurs from Congress people saying things like, maybe we shouldn't be teaching Chinese students AI or bioinformatics. So we need to keep an eye out for this. And if you think about international students, again, look at this map. Will we see universities be encouraged to recruit from Central Asia, from Pakistan, from parts of Africa in order to compete with China? Or will we see universities and colleges encouraged to try to recruit more students from other parts of the world that are more friendly to the United States, such as India and Japan? Now, more in the news and more in the popular mind is Russia's war in Ukraine, which continues to grind on and has every sign of becoming a frozen conflict like in Korea or Cyprus. And this matters for higher education in a few ways. We've already seen international higher education efforts to try and support Ukrainian academics. We've seen some interesting pushback against Russia and Russian culture in academia, including calls to not teach Russian literature or to criticize it. But also in Europe, we've seen some of the interesting impacts on physical campuses because we've seen the energy crisis roll out and leading to some campuses closing early or trying to end their sessions so they don't have to spend as much on precious energy supplies. So you want to keep an eye on for this as well. I'm about to talk about something even more complicated and more powerful. But before I do that, let me just quickly ask, how am I doing so far? Is this too slow, too fast, boring, overwhelming? Give me a quick chance. I see some thumbs up.
You're doing great.
Yeah,
Okay.
we got some just right in the chat too. So
Yeah. And Vince, I do wonder what happened in 2016. Gosh, that's quite a thing to think about. So let me add what is many ways the most powerful tool in the futurist toolkit, which is demographics. And I have to say, what I'm about to show you should be common knowledge, but is still in many ways shocking or surprising. In the 1960s through the 70s, there was a big push to call out humanity for overpopulating the world. And this became a major, major force. Popular books, popular media appearances, even at least one Hollywood movie, charged us with overpopulating the planet and gave rise to the idea of the human race becoming far too large to be manageable or even to survive. And this led to a large number of policy issues, cultural changes. Perhaps most famous is China's one child per couple policy. And it turns out that this was wrong. Let me explain. What you're looking at is a demographic map of one nation right now. And the shape you're seeing is also the shape of human history until about the year 1900. It's organized by age. So every slice here is a different age group. So if you look on the bottom, you'll see these are kids age 0 to 4, then age 5 to 9, and 10 to 14, and so on. And at a glance, you can see this is a population that produces a lot of babies, and then mortality sets in pretty quickly. So you have more toddlers than you have kids who are 5, more kids than you have teens, more teens and people in their 20s, and so on, ending up with very few elders. By the way, this is the demographic support behind a lot of traditional folkways, which tend to really revere and honor elders, such as Confucianism. Now, we know why this happened. We understand how this worked. And again, this is how most of the world looked until about 130 years ago. Then we changed. We took that pyramid and flipped it upside down, and we know exactly how and why this happened. Well, this happened in societies where there were advances in medical care, there were advances in public health, and especially advances in the status of women, namely women getting access to education, women getting access to jobs, and women getting access to reproductive capacity. Once you put those together, in almost every single society for the past 130 years, you get this pattern. Fewer and fewer kids born and people living longer and longer. And this is the shape of the future. This is also increasingly the shape of the present. And you can see, we're looking at Germany right now for one example, that we have more people in their 30s than in their 20s, more people in their 50s than in their 30s. It's an extraordinary development. And you can see this in nation after nation around the world. In fact, I'm kind of fascinated by how you can see it happening in midstream in some countries. So you look at Ecuador, kids age 20 on up, that population is the classic pyramid. But below that age, you can see the numbers beginning to drop. Now, this plays out according to the logical development. Basically, if a society has gone through modernity, they've gone through this demographic transition. Not all societies have done so. So here's a quick map. The countries that are yellow, that are orange, that are that kind of tan color are the ones, and also the light green are the ones that have gone through this transition. So you can see here, they're just looking at the United States, almost every state, looking at Russia, looking at Europe, looking at big swaths of China. You can see this happening. But a few nations, the ones that are blue, are the ones that are still producing kids at scale. Let me just zoom in and show you those. So some of them are in Central Asia, a couple are in Southeast Asia, but the main are in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. And in many ways, that's the demographic future of the next generation. That's where we're going to be expecting the largest number of kids. So why does this matter for higher education? Why are we even talking about this? Well, to begin with, this is changing the world we inhabit in ways that we haven't really planned on, in ways that may change a great deal. For example, this is one of the reasons why the French government is increasing the age of retirement, and why a lot of Congress people right now are making the same argument in the US, because that larger and larger senior population is more and more expensive to maintain. And we are increasingly having fewer and fewer workers to do so. Second, this matters for higher education. If we think about our traditional age undergraduate population, kids age 18 to 22, that pipeline is narrowing and getting smaller and smaller, which means we're going to see more and more competition between states, between colleges and universities for a smaller number of people. This also gives rise to the idea that if while we're living longer, maybe we should devote more resources to the more adult learners, and in fact, more towards seniors. So this is by itself a small revolution in higher education. And again, looking here at sub-Saharan Africa, this is where we should expect to see more and more international student recruitment. I mean, not to recruit from, say, Romania or the Baltics, because they're actually losing kids at scale, or Japan, which is shrinking rapidly, but to go to where the teenagers are. And there are other implications too. I mean, for example, it is possible that if we have a population that has fewer and fewer kids, that we may see fewer and fewer teenagers, which might mean fewer soldiers. This may in fact mean what a couple of journalists once called the geriatric peace, which I think is not a bad thing at all. In the chat, Mary Faria asked if we'll be able to get a copy of the slides. Sure, no problem. And Vince, thank you. These visuals are indeed quite striking. Now, in the United States, and I think almost everybody here is from the US, this plays out in some very interesting ways. And here I'm drawing on the work of Carleton College's Nathan Graw, who's done tremendous work in demographics. And he points out here that the states that are in, well, as you can see, orange, dark orange, red, those are the ones that are losing kids, that their population is shrinking. And you can see at a glance that this is really striking the Midwest and the Northeast and big chunks of the American South. Not coincidentally, those are the regions which tend to have the greatest number of colleges and universities. So take a look at New England. And these are populations that are going down very, very quickly. And these are the ones that are now seeking to compete with schools elsewhere. Now, the blue states, again, this is not red versus blue politically, quite the opposite. Nathan calls the arc from Texas to the Dakotas Fertility Alley. And it's important to see that Texas is really the giant here. That's the one that is really still producing kids. And in many ways, that's going to be the educational powerhouse for quite some time to come. Now, you can see this playing out even more narrowly in about 3 years. Graw did some very important research where he found out that in 2008, it's pretty clear that a lot of people decide not to have kids because of the economic crisis. If you do the math, 2008 plus, say, 17 or 18, there's an extra sharp decline in demographics. So we should expect that first-year application pool to really start to drop. He nicknames this a demographic cliff. A lot of people focus on that, but this is just one accentuation of a larger and larger decline. Vince, thank you. I'm glad you see the implications of this, which are huge. Tom Hames, my dear friend, points out Hispanic kids disproportionately go to college less than Anglo kids. And this is a key point that Graw points out. And this is one that's a little controversial, but he has a tremendous amount of data to point out that Hispanic kids tend not to go to college anywhere like most of the population in the US. So that population, well, I'll get to that in a minute, is growing and is less likely to attend. Enrique points, Harogui, I believe, I'm going to try not to mispronounce it too badly, points out that education institutions are now low in enrollment. Oh, hang on a second, Enrique, I'm coming to that in just a couple of slides. Now, one of the changes in demographics that gets more attention is our change in race and ethnicity. And this is really 3 key points. First, the white Caucasian population is declining. Second, the Hispanic population is continuing to increase. That is the second largest population in the US, the biggest minority by far. And third, we're seeing continued growth from the Asian American population. A very small number, roughly 5% right now, but one that is growing very, very quickly. The Black population is staying about the same. The Native American population is staying about the same. Pacific Island population is growing a little bit, but it's a very small population. What this means is pretty famously, and I'm sure we all know, that our student population, as well as our faculty and staff population increasingly, are becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. And this has all kinds of implications for higher education in many, many ways. Now, a lot of this was on the table before 2020. But the nationwide mobilization against racism following the murder of George Floyd really kicked us into overdrive. And we're in that mode to this day. And this reconsideration of race and racism is playing out in many, many areas. And it's important just to realize how broad this is. For example, we are talking about changing the curriculum in order to better reflect the lived experience of our students, talking about changing staffing in order to better represent the students who we're serving, changing professional development, lots and lots of DEI initiatives in order to make faculty more and staff more sensitive to more and more issues involving race, which represent a different world than many of them came up in. And also to change the administration, so the administration better reflects and is more sensitive to all this changing population, altering our student support, and also even the physical campus, when this is when we're thinking about the names of buildings, the art in buildings and sculptures. So all just this slide by itself is another revolution in how we think about higher education. Now, the population is changing in a few other ways as well. We still tend to think about higher education as teaching traditional age students. The typical student in many people's minds is an 18-year-old going off to college. But in reality, the reality is actually quite different. We have, among other things, a large number of adult learners, say 25 and up. And that number, depending on how you count it, is roughly 25 to 33%. The number grew until the pandemic, and it seems to have backed off a bit since then. But that's a large number of people. And it's different teaching them than teaching 18-year-olds. We're also seeing a greater number of first-generation college students. And the reason for this is clear. I'm going to unfold this a little bit more later, but basically, in the middle of the 20th century, we decided as a nation that the more people get more college experience, the better off we all are. And we've been trying that really hard. And in fact, the total number of students in American higher education boomed from 1980 until 2012. And we maxed out the population of students whose parents had college experience. And now we're trying to get the population of students whose parents have no college experience. And of course, first generation students require a lot of help in trying to navigate our at times Byzantine bureaucracy. But my favorite example of this is in the City University of New York, where the students have a nickname for a bad experience of running into bureaucracy. They call it being cunified. You know, you go to one office and you get one piece of advice, and you go to another office and get another piece. You say, I've been cunified again. People need help with that. On top of that, we have a large number of veterans because America is more or less still fighting the longest war in our history. And on top of that, for reasons we don't fully understand, we have a large and growing number of students with learning disabilities. And all of these students require more effort from us to support, which means more money and more training. They also make our experience, I think, a lot richer. Now, one other change, long forecasted, but finally happening, has to do with religion. And just a quick question. How many of you in the chat are working at institutions that are religiously affiliated? You know, Catholic University, Methodist University. If you just throw that in the chat, I'd love to hear it. If I don't see anything, then that means nobody. That's okay. That's okay. But one of the interesting challenges is that American religion is altering. Hello, Will. Was at a Methodist institution. Well, one of the things that's been happening since about the year 2000 is that American religious affiliation is changing. One key part of it you can see on this slide is the proportion of Americans who are not religiously affiliated. That is, they may consider themselves to be spiritual or religious, but are not formally part of any other institution. You know, they're not part of a church or a mosque or so forth. That number really took off. And you can see from the 70s until around 2000, that was around 10%. And since then, that has leapt upward into the 20s, up to close to 30%, which is a huge number. And the flip side of that is that the proportion of Americans who proclaim some form of church membership started going down in the same period. Just look at this. For most of the 20th century, we've got 3/4 or roughly that of Americans were church members of some church or other. And then starting in the late 90s, began to tick down. And then from 2000, it just falls off a cliff. Now we're down to less than half of the United States are religious or a part of a church. Why does this matter? Well, first of all, just think about this. I'll leave this as an exercise for each of you, what this does to American culture in all kinds of ways, but also for our institutions. Vince, that's the point about Texas. John attended Methodist University, very good. I taught at a small college in Louisiana, affiliated with the Methodist Church too. And now I'm working at Georgetown, which is of course famously a Catholic institution. But that means that all those religious institutions are going to have to compete for an even smaller still proportion of students who are interested in what they have to offer. Plus, think about what this means of the discipline of religious studies. It may be that there are just fewer and fewer students interested in this. So we may see religious studies begin to shrink as well. By the way, this is strongly marked by age, much more strongly than it ever has been. So you can see here, just looking at people, for example, who are, say, the Nixon generation, if you will, who are a little less likely to belong to churches, but that number is still 66%. If we look at millennials, that number is 1/3. So again, thinking about teaching and supporting students, this is a huge change. Now I come back to Enrique's point. Tom, sorry, I don't have that broken down by race on those charts. If you go to my blog, I linked to one study which did break that down by race. And the racial breakdown is very, very interesting because, among other things, the Latino population was majority Catholic, and that is changing drastically as that population both gets more immersed in the more secular environment of the United States, but also Pentecostalism is beginning to grow. Amanda, thank you for the link to my blog. The Black population remains very fervently allied with several different Protestant denominations. The white population is kind of all over the map. It's very, very interesting. And that's before we break this down into much smaller religions, such as Islam or Judaism. So those students who are in many ways more challenging to support, shrinking as part of a population, they are also shrinking. And this is a fact which I'm astonished that we don't talk more about in higher education. Every dean, every provost, every president I know stays up nights worrying about this. Every board knows this well. But basically, I mentioned that we grew higher education enrollment until 2012. Well, Enrique anticipated me. Since 2012, total enrollment in American higher education has gone down every single year. Now, from 2013 to 2019, it went down about 1% a year, which is not a lot, but it builds up, and it's a reversal of direction. In 2020, 2021, 2022, the pandemic years, the population really dropped. The grad enrollment rose for a couple of years and then fell. Undergraduate enrollment really dropped by 5, 6, 7% a year. Now that we are supposedly past the pandemic, or at least that's the attitude a lot of higher education takes, that means we are still low and we're not recovering. Why does this matter? The reasons I think should be pretty clear. One is that the overwhelming majority of institutions in the US depend for the majority of their revenue on enrollment, on tuition and fees. And if that enrollment drops, so does money. And again, I'll leave that up to you as a way to work that out, how that leads to cuts of all kinds. Secondly, I mentioned that for almost a century now, America has been convinced that we need to give more and more people more and more access to higher education. We're failing. We're going backwards on that. We're educating fewer and fewer people. And by the way, these numbers include a lot of international students. So it's not just, the picture for Americans is actually even worse than that. In the chat, Tom points out that community colleges are down a lot. Community colleges have been massacred by this. And this is also strange because usually community colleges respond to unemployment. So when we had the 2020 massive economic shutdown, we saw community college enrollment actually go down even further. Other sectors have played out in different ways. State schools have gone up and down, but largely down. For-profit institutions have been largely gutted. It's a very, very big transformation. Amanda points out there, they're up because 1/3 of enrollment is from dual enrollment. Yeah, I mean, this is how community colleges are staying alive, just by enrolling high school students. They have some challenges to them. Jarek points out, what does it mean to student populations? Oh, your question is about religion. Great question about the decline of religious. Here, let me just go back a little bit. Oops. One of the questions is, you have to think about religious sensitivities. You have to think about student interest. Think about discussions in classes like, Western tradition or in Eastern religion. How the students are going to respond is going to be very, very different. That's a really good question. You mentioned Catholic institutions. I've talked to several different Catholic universities which say that they are de-emphasizing religion. Instead, they are emphasizing social justice, which is not a cynical thing. That's definitely part of the Catholic tradition, but it reflects some of the particular challenges that Catholic Church is facing with clerical sex abuse. Vince adds, this is killing enrollment long-term more than I realize in four-year institutions. Yeah. Tom Hames adds that vulnerable populations are decimated by COVID and never recovered. I think that's truer than it sounds. I mean, not only do we have people who are dead, not only do we have people who are disabled, we have the challenge of long-term COVID, long COVID, which we still don't really have a handle on. We also have the problem of people who are trying to help people with COVID. So we may have some would-be students who have to be home in order to care for a parent or a grandparent who is stricken. Tom and Amanda have a good discussion here about dual credit, which tends to be Anglo and affluent, even though the idea was the opposite. So the enrollment picture is a big one, and it's one that we really need to think about. And I don't really see it reversing. I think this is pretty steep. Here, this is a quick extrapolation out. I just pointed this ahead to where we might be headed. If we just continue on this line, it's a pretty straightforward line. Now, the students who do enroll are different in another way as well. That's very interesting. And this is something I think we all know in our bones and we've all seen anecdotally, but it's important to look at with some objective data behind it. And what we're seeing is a sea change in what degrees students get, what majors they have. So this is a graph from the American Historians Association, and it measures changes in majors. The horizontal line is the degree of change. Now, I don't want to work you through this entire chart because it's pretty big, but look at the top right. Those are fields that are growing the most. And and those are the ones that I don't think will surprise anybody. We have computer science, nursing, exercise science, computer and electrical engineering, health and medical, environment and conservation, engineering, math and statistics. I mean, STEM is ruling the roost. And take a look at those numbers. They are increasing by what? Not just 10%, 20, 50, 100%. I mean, those are the boom fields. Now look in the bottom left, which is where fields are dropping. Religion, humanities, area studies, history, English, religion. I'm not showing you this figure out of any special delight. I'm a humanities PhD. I've taught English, and I'm still passionate about the humanities. I see this, and this makes me incredibly sad. But it's vitally important for understanding where higher education is headed. And when I talk to my humanities colleagues, they complain about the dominance of STEM. Students are voting with their feet. They're skipping Victorian literature and they're getting electrical engineering instead, if I can make a parable. Right? Criminology, Jarek, is really, really interesting. Partly that's, it goes in a few different ways, but in the US, we are always, always very frightened of crime, very concerned about it. And where really, I think we'll see it continue to grow. And that varies geographically as well. But also we should expect to see more campuses invest more in terms of hiring and building, research support, professional support for these fields where the students are beating down the door. And we should expect to see more and more departments shrink or get closed that are focusing on the bottom left. Now, let me put all this in a different context. let me talk about macroeconomics. And boy, it is still a thrill for me as an English professor to talk about macroeconomics with pleasure too, although this is not necessarily happy. Jarek asks, why is English at the bottom? Well, we can talk, I'll go back to that. One of the reasons for these declines is perception. Simply the perception that the fields in the top of this chart are the ones that are more likely to get students jobs. And there's a lot of reality behind that. I mean, that's where we have crying needs for things. I mean, cybersecurity, for example, is absolutely just, you can just push any warm body into that field now, they can get a job. Whereas the humanities are doing a terrible job at convincing people that what they produce gets students jobs. And we can complain about students focusing a lot on jobs until we think about their economic environment, which I'm going to come back to. So the economic environment. One of the things that we're experiencing is a transformation of our workforce. And this is a deeper transformation than it looks. And it's one that has more impact than I think most people are accustomed to thinking about. Partly because we have an economy that was largely built on the giant industrial triumph of the American economy in the mid-20th century. And a lot of that still has echoes to this day. We thought in the 1980s and 90s that we would transition to an information economy, and that's only half true. Yes, the information economy is huge in dollar amounts, but it is very small in terms of the number of people it employs. In fact, the large sector for labor is the service sector. People working with other people, people working to do things that don't produce things. That's the big sector of the American economy. Now, that also has changed in terms of the status of that work. That is, we used to have a unionized workforce, up to a third or half of the population was unionized. We used to have an ethos of long-time employee-employer relationships, and that is increasingly degrading and changing, so that we have more and more often people work multiple jobs, multiple employers, multiple careers in one lifetime. The gig economy is there as kind of one extreme form of this. In fact, the Australians refer to that as the American economy. But we're also seeing more and more technology requirements. So not necessarily more technology jobs as much as jobs that require technology in them. So if you're going to be working as a pollster, you have to use large data sets and maps, for example. So all of these change why this matters for higher education. These are the jobs, this is the job environment that students are heading out into. And we need to prepare for them. We need to prepare them very, very carefully. Now, the other major macroeconomic change, and this is one that we're still just thinking through and not thinking through well at all, has to do with income inequality and wealth inequality. And this chart draws on a whole bunch of great research from the past 20 years that are just vital and really in many ways accepted. What you're looking at is a measure of income inequality over time. The vertical axis is inequality. The higher up, the more unequal. You can see this chart peaks at around 22% or 24%. If it were 100%, Jeff Bezos owns everything and the rest of us are broke. Right? The horizontal axis is time. So if you look on the left edge, you see a portrait of the world in 1910, which is fairly unequal. Think about that as the Gilded Age or the Robber Baron Age. And then watch this. From about 1910 to 1950 or so, inequality does fall off a cliff. And we know why. We have 2 world wars, which literally destroy wealth. We have a Great Depression, which does the same, which is global, and there's the US made worse. But we also have, partially in response, a whole bunch of political and social programs that redistribute wealth. Think in Britain, National Health Service, in the United States, the New Deal. And what you see is something that is actually pretty unusual. The middle of this graph, from about 1950 to about 1985. In that period, we were the least economically unequal we've ever been. And I just want you to look at that for a minute, because that is the source of so much of our culture today. All right, I'm a Generation X person, so by law, I have to scoff at baby boomers, but this is the formative experience of the boomer generation, which in many ways leads our nation. This is also, if you think of popular culture from this period, go take a look at TV or movies from this period and look at how they depict wealth. The wealth gaps are really, really different from what we see now. And also, this is when we last overhauled higher education. That's when we opened the Department of Education, when we started Pell Grants, when community colleges just blossomed around the world. This is when four-year institutions started offering master's degree programs. This is when we started saying, hey, everybody should go to college. And then look around 1985. Income inequality starts to rev up again, and it grows, and it builds, and it hasn't slowed down yet. And in fact, right now, if you talk to people in the business world, I don't mean talking to Marxists, right? I don't mean talking to me or Bernie Sanders. I mean talking to people in the insurance industry, people in the finance sector. They say quite easily, this is about the same as the Gilded Age. In fact, Swiss Re, a reinsurance company, calls this Gilded Age 2.0. And they don't mean that as a criticism. They mean that as just a description of where things are. Now, why does this matter? Why does this matter for us? Well, let me just grab some of your questions here. One is Joel and Andreas point out that inequality of wealth is even steeper. Quite true. In fact, the great French economist Thomas Piketty points out that wealth increases tend to drive out or tend to exceed income increases. Antoinette mentions that it can come from generational and systematic inequality over time. Absolutely, absolutely. And then Tom mentions different strokes. Yeah, it's an interesting example. Jarek asks if income inequality is a sign of falling civilizations. It really can be. We saw that in Rome. The last few centuries of the Western Roman Empire saw escalating income inequality. If we look at the French and Russian revolutions, we saw that they occurred partly based on perceptions and concerns over inequality that were not met. The American politician Adlai Stevenson sometimes refers to the revolution of increasing expectations, people wanting more and not getting it. Right. And then Joel points out this maps neatly into the increase and decrease in the power of organized labor. Absolutely. Private sector union membership right now in the US is something like 2.5–3%. That matches on very, very quickly. Jarek points out a social change. The quote, greed is good. By the way, I forget the actor who played that character in the movie Wall Street. I think it was Michael Douglas. He said that in an interview that people to this day come up to him and say, thank you for inspiring them to take careers in Wall Street. And he says, that was the opposite message of the movie. But anyway, but that is, we can refer to this as a neoliberal order. But in terms of higher education, think about this. First of all, what this graph shows you is one of the reasons why higher ed is kind of dislocated today. We were last rebuilt for a different economic settlement. Second, if you think about the jobs our students are getting after they spend time with us, what we're preparing them for, it's a little different. We're preparing them for a time of increasing inequality. So it's interesting to see how different colleges and universities respond to that. Some of them market themselves openly as being places to get you into the 1%. A lot of elite liberal arts colleges do this. A lot of Ivy League colleges are pretty explicit about that. But you have to wonder, what about the rest of everybody? And then furthermore, we think about fundraising. Should you try to fundraise off of your entire alumni population, or should you focus on a few high net worth value individuals? In fact, should you shape your advising and your curriculum to producing such high net worth value individuals? There's a whole series of changes implicit in this data. Joel goes on to add, this is very much about the loss of political will to support public higher education financially. Joel, absolutely. One of the trends that you can see if we start in the mid-1980s here is the decline in per student spending from states for public higher education. So public universities are about 2/3 of those in the US, and the proportion of money they get from the states has just declined steadily. And it's declined across the US geographically, blue and red states alike. My alma mater had a president, University of Michigan. I'll paraphrase here. He said he used to describe the University of Michigan as being a state-supported institution, then a state-assisted institution, then as a state-located institution, and then he called it a state-molested institution, which turns us to student debt. And that is how we fund higher education in the US. And no other country is doing this at this kind of scale. Nobody else. Britain is starting to go down this road, but they're way behind us. We're looking at nearly $2 trillion in debt. It's the second biggest source of debt in the US. It's bigger than credit card debt, which is kind of mind-blowing, way bigger than car notes. It's second only to mortgages. And nothing is really slowing this down. We're continuing to generate this kind of debt. It's an open question whether or not the Supreme Court will shut down President Biden's effort to forgive some of it, but this is absolutely vast. Here's an exercise you can try doing sometime. Ask your colleagues how many of them are still paying off student loans. I ask academic audiences this, and what interests me not so much as the big forest of arms and hands that go up, so much as the people who look surprised by this. This is, by the way, overstatable. You can, the press loves to show all kinds of great horror stories of a dentist with $1 million in student debt, the barista with $100,000 in student debt, but it is definitely a fact of life. We can talk about this a bit more if you like. Now, in the chat, Vince points out financing of higher ed began to take flight. Not just that, Vince, but also finance in general. Starting in the late 1980s, the financial sector really blossomed. There was a key point in the 1990s when General Motors Finance Company made more money than the rest of the company did making cars. The financial sector is a huge part of our economy. In fact, Jarek asks about declining civilizations. Financialization of an economy is very, very hard to come back from. So let me just quickly ask you this, and if you already know the answer, don't leap out just yet. What you're looking at is a drone with a chainsaw. And the question I have for you is, which country was the first to invent that? Put your answer in the chat if you can think of it. Canada, Brazil? Oh, good guesses. No. China, Russia, the US. You'd think it'd be the US. You really would think, but we are falling behind. Indonesia, Germany, not bad. No, close, Alexandra, close, Reginald. It's actually Finland. Finland is a nation of intense innovation, and they also are very close to their forests. I'm putting this up here partly because it's fun to see. Drone with a chainsaw just sounds like a band name, right? But also because I just want to talk about technology a bit. And I want just to give you a sense of just how weird and how rapidly developing technology is. And I want to talk about it in a kind of macro level first. David, that's a pretty good joke. Yeah, drone, chainsaw, balloon. So one of the things to think about is what automation is doing to everything in society. And by automation, I mean the combination of robots and AI. And there are three ways we can imagine this going forward. One is the one that people fear, that we will lead to widespread unemployment and underemployment. And just as technology gets better and better at doing more and more jobs, medical transcriptionists, for example, right now are easily outpaced by Microsoft software. So this could lead to unemployment or underemployment. Second possibility is that, yeah, we'll see jobs lost, but we'll invent new jobs. So right now, if you can coax generated artificial intelligence into good outputs, that's a skill. Skill can be taught. It's a job people want to pay for. If you can work with and speak knowledgeably about AI and ethics, your jobs are ready for you. Third possibility is that AI automation in general won't ever be good enough to fully replace somebody. So Bethany Tasaka still has a job, but she has to work a lot more with automation. Again, that could be robots, or it could be AI, or both. I think of that as a kind of cyborg settlement. Now, why this matters for higher education? I mean, obviously it matters for society, but for higher education, it shapes our curriculum and our pedagogy. So if the first model happens, if the first model occurs and we lead to widespread unemployment and underemployment, then we have this real interesting challenge. What are we training our students for? What kind of careers? What kind of jobs? And then also, if they're going to have downtime, let's just say they work 30-hour jobs for the rest of their lives with stretches of unemployment, maybe the humanities come back. maybe. If on the other hand, we have new jobs and new careers, then again, we have to change our curriculum in order to prepare students for them. And if we have that kind of cyborg job where now Bethany's just worried that I keep picking on her. If Bethany's doing her job, preparing to be the next Bethany, we have to change our curriculum. So it may be that someone's going to go off and get a degree in law, and they have to learn software that does text mining along with AI. If someone's going to get a job working in the military, they're going to have to work with robots and so on. Each of those changes our curriculum as well as our pedagogy. Now, I want to talk a little bit about generative AI, and I can come back to this at the end, but I want to touch on this now because this is a wild field and I'm doing some research into it. Before I do that, let me just quickly check a couple of the comments. Understood, Vince. Have a good time. Thank you, Elizabeth. Jen Shepard points out that they've studied a mechatronics program. We teach workforce skills the boomer generation is retiring from and new skills such as electronics maintenance. Very, very good, Jen. Very, very good. Do you have a makerspace there? I wonder. Now, if we take a look at, understood, Jen, but generative AI, I mean AI that makes stuff. So not AI that helps you, that helps you recover your password or that helps you pick out what your opponent in a computer game is going to do or helps your car drive. I mean AI that generates new stuff. So for example, tools like DALL-E or Midjourney, which make art on demand, tools like ChatGPT, which produce text on demand, and more tools that produce music and other images and increasingly content for other media as well. This is taking off like mad right now, and there are all kinds of issues and limitations. There's a lot of hype, a lot of money, a lot of fear. My own advice is, if you're up to it, experiment. Grab some of these tools and play with them, just so you can get used to the idea, because it's a very, very interesting experience. It's not one that most of us have ever had. And what kind of impact these might have? Well, if we think about the technological impact, there's two AIs in theory. One AI is narrow and one is broad. Broad AI is what you think of when you think of a science fiction robot that can talk to you. You can ask it questions about cooking. It'll give you advice about movies. You can talk about your feelings and can switch topics pretty easily. We don't have general AI yet. We're nowhere close to it, depending on who you talk to. Narrow AI is what we've got. So the AI that helps you correct the filters in your photography, the AI that helps you do autocomplete when you're typing in Gmail, that's what we've got. And so it looks like generative AI is an example of that. It also can connect with other technologies. So think, for example, about being able to connect ChatGPT to a virtual reality program so that you can help ChatGPT sketch out a wireframe for a three-dimensional object. Or imagine having the ability to create new content in new media. So I and a couple of friends have this bad habit or a hobby where we ask visual generative AI to generate movie posters for movies we'd like to see. Movies that don't exist or that might not be able to exist because people have altered dead. But imagine being able to make a movie on spec, to say, okay, I'd like to see a zombie movie where all the characters are from 1940s British comedies. It takes place in Canberra. I want to be black and white as if filmed by Stanley Kubrick. Go. And then to have a clip that comes out of this, or a full feature-length movie. We don't have that now, not yet, but this is the direction we're pointing in. We could also imagine this connecting with other tools as well. But beyond technology, we have social implications. For example, we know that whenever any major new technology shows up, we see businesses rise and fall or transmute into something completely new, where Microsoft becomes an AI company, for example. There's a lot of money sloshing into this field, a tremendous amount of venture capital. We also see the truth problem. I mean, every new medium gives us options for lying and cheating. So we now have this problem that some of the generative AI bullshits, if I can be technical about it, where it makes things up. ChatGPT will create citations that look pretty reasonable, but are not in fact real. We have to also have the question of deepfakes. We have the ability to take, say, Amanda Tainter and have her say something like, Nickelback is the greatest musical band in human history. And she says, no, I never said that. No human would ever say that. Oh, we have the video, right? So we have all these concerns and worries. Plus, politically, think about what happens as governments use this technology. I've been asking ChatGPT to give me governmental policies for a few weeks now. Everything from tax policies to how to ruin the opposing political party with deniability to how to conduct a military campaign in East Asia. This is a public tool, and I'm not an expert in geopolitical analysis. So think about what's going on in the Pentagon and the CIA, in Russia's FSB, and so on. Plus, we have the opposite. We have the desire to regulate this stuff, which may be to restrict it or to cut it out entirely, because there's a large backlash coming up. And on top of this, think about what this does to our culture in a few different ways. Right now, we've got a few different generative AIs. This will just keep growing. An interesting thing with the text ones, if you look at, say, ChatGPT, is that it's very centralist. It's very bland. That is, it's not politically wild. And it tries really hard to sound inoffensive. In fact, that's often a way of detecting ChatGPT pros, is that it's pretty dull or committee sounding. Well, when do we have the Chinese government release one that gives you text that conforms with Xi Jinping thought? What happens when the Republican Party issues one, called Freedom Bot, or the Russian government, or the French Catholic Church? We should expect a whole plethora of those in different ways. And then they produce tailored content in all kinds of ways. Imagine asking the Xi Jinping bot to talk about where the world is going for the next 50 years versus asking the Russian bot versus asking ChatGPT. We should see a lot more content. And we've already seen this. One science fiction magazine that I like shut down new submissions because they just got overwhelmed by machine-generated ones. And then we have to think about what happens to creativity. If Jarek and I are going to co-author an article, say, and we sit down and we're just not starting. We got the blank page and we're not quite sure where to go. Jarek asks ChatGPT to kick out a few paragraphs. Oh, okay. We don't like him so much, so we edit them, we keep going, but they contributed part of it. Should we consider ChatGPT as a co-author? What does this mean for copyright, for intellectual property? I mean, potentially, there's quite a lot going on there. All right, before I go on further, let me just make sure I get people's questions and comments here, because you guys are all over the map and people are really excited by this. Vicky points out a political cartoon drawn by artificial intelligence. Good call. Just saw a manga, the whole issue. All the art came from generative AI. Enrique asks, we have narrow AI, but what would the consequences be when we get general AI? That's huge, Enrique. That's when we go into pure science fiction territory. We wonder about things like, is the generative AI a person? Do we give them legal rights? Do we restrict them from being able to do things with technology? What happens when we control how much it can learn, how much it can grow? This is where the singularity might become on the table. And then we have Jared points out that we need to take responsibility for how and what purpose we use those tools. Yes, not to cede all of our responsibility to the technology itself. And Julia, I think it's Yoncheva points out that there are tools that students need to be trained on. Exactly. This is where the educational part comes in. And the educational responses are all over the map. People want to ban these, people want to use them. And how do you teach students how to use these? Do you teach them to make content or to how to assess it? Do you teach them how to use this in drafting content and so on? Raquel points out the Clarksworld story. Thank you. Jarek asks, so if I'm using AI, I can figure out how to alleviate rush hour traffic. Should I take it to City Hall at the city engineers handle it? Sure. If they're out doing it already. Yeah. Now, one interesting challenge, though, is that if we're looking at ChatGPT, it might not be too useful because it's historically trained. It's using a whole set of texts that ended in 2020, 2021. You might want to try Bing, because Bing can actually connect with the internet right now. Jarek, environmental questions. I'm going to come back to this. Irene asked the great question of morality in AI. Absolutely. This is one of the great questions about AI and ethics. Everything from how moral or how ethical are AIs and what are the ethics around using it. And then Jamie MacArthur says, would this AI stuff potentially be similar to how there was a reliance on ancient texts during the Middle Ages prior to the Renaissance? Oh, very neat idea, Jamie. Very cool idea. You want to go to the sources, not to the generated stuff. Cool idea, Jamie. You should write that up. And then Etienne asks, writes something and wants me to pronounce it. Metathesiophobia, I think is what you're talking about. Kanadi gives us the best AI music generators. Good call. Thank you for sharing that. And Tom gives us a principle for the cyborg way, which is AI is good at seeing connections. Humans have to figure out what to do with those insights. That's the partnership. Tom is always a great thinker, always asks good questions. All right, let's put technologies on the table. Now, let's look into the recent past and get some lessons. I've been following the pandemic very closely since it started off. And I have all kinds of thoughts about this. And my publisher has talked me out of writing a new book on it. One of the things that I find fascinating is if you look at the historical record of pandemics, dating back to the Roman period, you see a common arc that happens. When they start off, people get terrified, shocked, horrific, and they do all kinds of terrible things. And then they get inured to it. I recommend Daniel Defoe, the author of Robinson Crusoe, just a fantastic writer, has this really interesting book about the epidemic of the bubonic plague in 17th century London. And it's weird as heck to read now, because you get people getting really new agey about trying to find ways to escape the plague. You get this point where everyone's confined to quarters at home and people keep trying to escape. My favorite scenes is actually one family that didn't want to go out, so they take the plague warden and throw gunpowder on him and blow him up so they can escape. This sounded pretty funny back when I read it in grad school, and now it just sounds pretty realistic. Initially, he sees a pile of dead bodies and weeps with horror. After a few months, the death toll is just part of life. So I'm showing you this graph from Johns Hopkins, and you can see 7 million dead. And that's unremarkable now. In the United States, we lost more than 1 million, possibly 1.2 million. And we don't mourn it. We don't have any monuments. We don't set aside an hour for time. It's just part of life. Now, what did this do to us? Well, I admit to a little bit of foresight here. Academia Next came out in early 2020. I wrote it in the previous 4 years. And this is a look at the next generation of higher ed. And some of what I talked about today, you can find in it. And as a thought exercise, I asked the readers to think about what would happen if a pandemic struck the world. What might that do to higher education? And you can see here, I broke it down into a few different ways, talking about online learning, what would happen to conferences, what would happen to athletics, and so on. And no one paid attention to this page until about 3 years ago. And now people come to me and say, what did you do, Alexander? What dark forces are you in league with? What do you know? The sad truth is, Future's world has been about pandemics for the past 35 years. We've been focused on that. Public health has been laser focused on that. Not everyone else was, though. So why am I talking about this? Well, I want to explain why this matters for higher education now and in the future. And one of the things was we experienced this pandemic as a horrible thing, as a shock with an awful lot of injury and death. But we also met it with a huge amount of creativity. And this is something we don't really, I think, own up to, but we should. We learned in a hurry. I don't know how many of you talked to faculty in the spring of 2020 who said, what's the learning management system? How do I teach on Zoom and all this? And the fact is, we learned really fast. And we made mistakes, we made errors, but we did this. I mean, think about it. An institution that we think of as so conservative and hidebound, we mutated really quickly and without any support. I mean, the Wall Street Journal asked me a couple of scenarios, and I came up with 3 for how higher education was handling it. This is too simple. We were much more complicated than that. My colleagues Eddie Maloney and Josh Kim came up with 15 scenarios. And we did more than that. We rebooted our curriculum. We changed class times. We broke down individual campuses. We changed classes and when they be online, when they be face to face. We did all kinds of stuff. And yeah, not all of these worked. But it proved that we have a core of innovation inside of us. Right now, everyone involved was involved with this, and we should own up to it. Now, a second thing to think about is how we shifted and how we use technologies. And one of them is that we should stop talking about online versus face-to-face. We really have a kind of baseline in between now. I really like the HyFlex term. I think it's really descriptive. And the founder of the term, or the coiner, Bryan, says that you should think of HyFlex meaning that for any given face-to-face meeting, people can decide if they're going to be there in person or online. And I'm not saying that this is easy to do. It takes a lot of work. I'm not saying that HyFlex is the savior of everything. What I'm saying is that this is kind of the center of our existence now. It's the median, it's the through line. That it's actually pretty rare for us to have entirely face-to-face or entirely online events, that we blend a lot. And that's kind of what we've taken away from the pandemic. Also, some of the questions that came up. Belinda Vincent points out we're doing HyFlex for our faculty hate it. Yeah, it takes work. I first did HyFlex in 1999, 1988. And it takes a lot of work. But it's definitely doable. I do this now. Tom mentions blended learning. Yeah, I agree. It's a nicer phrase. Jared points out people quit rather than face the Zoom, which is one of the reasons why asynchronous learning is really useful. Will points out addressing in-person and online audience at the same time is very challenging to do well. It really is. But think about it as kind of having bifocals, where you have to toggle back and forth between those two worlds. Again, I'm not saying this is the best. I'm saying this is something that we have to get used to. And it might not be, as Mary Faria says, it might not be that's the classroom's future. I suspect more classrooms will have it than we think now. Now, the pandemic was huge and remains huge, but it shrinks in comparison to what may be the single biggest challenge facing human civilization. I'm going to talk about this for a few minutes, in part because it's the subject of my new book, which is coming out in just a couple of weeks. Which has to do with climate change. Take a look at this photo. What you're seeing is a weather station in Cape Cod. And the US Weather Service just gave up on it. You see the Atlantic Ocean right next to it. The Atlantic Ocean is rising. And you can see that between the Atlantic Ocean and this weather station is basically scrub and a bit of sand. So the weather station did the math. They said, well, we could build a wall or a barrier between the ocean and the weather station, or we could elevate the station, put up in pylons, or we could just move it somewhere else. And they decided instead just to let it go. At some point in the next couple of decades, the sea will eat this up. I mention this to show you that climate change is a future trend, but it's also one that is right now acting in the present. So let me explain a bit about this and where I'm going with this. Again, this is my new book, which is the first monograph on the subject. I'm not going to talk about fine-grained details right away. I talk about this at the macro level. And this is also a long-term trend. I mean, in climate science, people speak about the year 2100 as a kind of milestone, but everyone points out it doesn't stop at 2100. This goes on beyond that. There's a lot of room for variation depending on where you are, your institutional dynamics. And I'm not going to talk to you about climate science right now because you could all probably know it and it's easy to find out about it. What I'm instead going to point out is how higher ed responds is very interesting and not simple. See, on the one point, we take a look at how the physical campus responds. To what extent your physical campus is in danger of being chewed up by the sea or being hailed on by sand, or how students want to change what cars are allowed on campus. I'll talk about this in a minute. The second domain is how the research enterprise responds. And we know right now that most of climate science comes out of academic research. The third domain is how this changes teaching and learning, arguably our core mission. And then a fourth is how does this shape our interaction with the world beyond campus? So let me just dive into this a bit. If you think about the physical campus, climate change hits this in more ways than it looks like at first. So you think about buildings, the creation of buildings, the operation of buildings emits CO2 to different degrees depending on the kind of building. So how do we renovate this? Do we try to repurpose buildings and redesign them in ways that emit less CO2? In fact, do we come up with buildings that are carbon negative, that actually suck down carbon? Do we renovate current buildings? Do we tear some down, or do we build new ones? So literally, the physical campus has been the process of being transformed. Then we have our power. Most campuses in the US and in the world get their power from off campus. They source it by buying it from a utility or a company somewhere else. Most of those utilities are providing the power by burning oil, natural gas, burning coal in particular. So how do we resource that? Berea College in Kentucky recently bought shares of a couple of hydroelectric power plants. So now that's where they get their power from, nice renewable source. Or do you put solar power panels on your campus? Do you put wind turbines in your campus? Do you plug into water if you've got that on campus? A third issue is transportation. That campuses have all kinds of vehicles. We own fleets, shuttles and cars and carts and that kind of thing. Plus, people come to our campuses with vehicles. So do we switch our fleet to electric? Do we start to discourage people from bringing fossil fuel burning vehicles on campus? Do you ban them? And then how do you support that? And for example, do you put more and more electrical chargers on campus? Do you take fossil fuel? Do you have special lots just for fossil fuel burning cars and make them smaller or more distant to discourage people? And then think about food. Our food systems right now generate both carbon dioxide and methane at a huge scale. So does our campus food service change? Do we start serving more and more plant-based food? Do we try to grow more food locally? And what does this do to our agriculture programs? And on top of that, think about campuses that are in physical danger, either today or in the next couple of decades. Do they have to move? Let me show you an example. Here is one map. If we do nothing about climate change, what North America might look like by 2100. And if you just run your eyes along that map, there are some shocks. And take a look at the Northeast, for example. Look at how all those schools around Boston, New York, all that is underwater. And it's not just underwater, by the way. Well, as the sea level rises, it means that more salt water infiltrates the water table inside. So you have to imagine what that does to all kinds of growing things. Look down the coast, all the way to the southeast coast. Look at Florida, just gone completely. And look up into New York and along the Mississippi, where there's now an inland sea. In fact, look at the West Coast. There's an inland sea just inside of San Francisco. The Sea of Cortez reaches up to LA. This is not radical science fiction or fantasy. This is basically just math and geology making this work. What does this do to education? If you're in New Orleans, if you're in Boston, what are your plans for this? The Florida Keys, I'm going to just zero on Florida because Florida is fun and Florida is the most exposed of all US states. The Florida state government has already given up on some of the Keys. They're going to protect some of the Keys by elevating them, but they're going to give some of these up to the ocean. That's already happened. If we take a look at Miami-Dade County, this is very, very interesting. If you haven't been there, the city is at sea level and it's built on limestone. So one of the things that happens is the city floods sometimes during the day when there is no storm, there's no rain or bad weather. It just floods. So what happens to the colleges there? Here's a quick sketch of colleges and universities in Miami, a few blocks from the Atlantic Ocean. You can see a whole bunch of them. In fact, if we zoom in a little further forward, here's a half dozen on the beach. International Fine Arts College, the FIU College of Business, Babson College, Miami. What are these campuses? I mean, think about the choices. Do you build a wall, not in the Trumpian sense, but a city wall? Do you elevate the buildings so that water can wash underneath them? Or do you pick up stakes and move somewhere else? These are the kind of decisions that have to be made. And this is just water. Well, here in the chat, Will Roberts points out desert states will be unlivable too. This is a huge issue. Desertification and aridification is spreading across the world. There are universities on the edge of the Sahara Desert and the American Southwest. We have to wonder about cities like Phoenix or Las Vegas and wonder, do we keep them existing much longer? Because they need an increasing amount just to stay alive. Another question that Vicki Klein brings up, if we switch to electric cars, how do we know the power plants generating the electricity is green? Yes, good question. I mean, sourcing all this is a planetary redesign. I'm not exaggerating. It is that deep a problem right now. Tom Haynes points out another problem, which is wet bulb temperature. Wet bulb means the temperature plus humidity. So in Arizona, that's not really an issue. But Florida, in the American Southeast, this is a huge issue. And wet bulb temperature can reach a point where it kills people. So when do we see people migrating out of, say, Georgia or out of South Carolina? There's a few video here, which I won't have a chance to take a look at right now. Raymond Galinsky points out another issue. E-cars require fossil fuels. Many of the minerals used for e-vehicles exploit people in developing countries. Quite true. There's a huge ethical problem around this. Around the Congo, which has a terrible, terrible, long-running war, we get a lot of great stuff. Plus, there's geopolitics in terms of rare earth minerals, where China and the US are now trying to scoop the global share of this. I mean, this is a hairy, enormous problem. Plus, we're still on the physical campus, right? You think about travel. Well, one of the sad things is that air travel is horrendous for climate change because jet fuel emits a ton of CO2. And unlike cars, we don't have a good solution right now for replacing that fuel. And people are researching this like crazy, but it's a very, very tricky problem. So in Sweden, they came up with this term of flygskam, which is to convince people, shame them not to fly when they could do something else, like be online or take the train. So we may see more and more demand for that. But, well, on the plus side, we know how to have academic work go on that doesn't involve travel. We're doing it right now. I mean, Jarek's program here that all of you are participating in. We know how to do this. The pandemic taught everybody how to do this. So maybe we'll see more of that. In fact, I've seen some interesting, if you'll forgive the expression, high flex academic meetings where some people participate remotely and some people participate face to face. You can see here, this is a shot of me and a friend. Me, I'm in what's basically a Segway with an iPad on top of it. Now I'm driving around piloting it remotely, and there he was in person. Do we move for that kind of option? On the other hand, there is a lot of resistance to this. Faculty and staff often see travel as part of their work, that it's necessary. They go to archives or other research sites which aren't electronic right now, or they find that the social immersion in the community can't be duplicated online, or new faculty, new staff, new to their careers really need to soak up all those connections right away. Plus, not everyone has access to all this technology. Now, all of this, that's just the physical campus. Now, let's talk about research. Again, research is how we learn about climate change, right? This is a key way that we work. Well, we are seeing more and more fields do more and more climate research. So if you think, for example, about the sciences, the natural sciences, they're pretty obvious. You think about chemistry, hydrology, earth science, environmental science. I mean, obviously, all of these contribute a great deal. But also the social sciences are turning more and more to climate change. But one person already got the Nobel in economics because he came up with a model for figuring out how we discount investment in the future. You see psychologists who already have a whole galaxy of terms studying what happens to the human mind when your childhood or your early adulthood environment is now changed. We also see people in poli-sci doing research on things like if governments respond to climate change, what does this do to sovereignty? And even the humanities, my field, they're finally catching up on this. It took a long time, but we have the environmental humanities. We have scholars studying things like what happens to religion in climate change. The current Pope has a huge encyclical urging people to fight climate change. What do you do when you're, say, a worshiper of the river Ganges and the river Ganges dries up? What kind of new religion should we expect? And so on. So my point is, there's more and more research happening on climate change, and universities and colleges have to figure out how to support it. So if you have a faculty member in philosophy who wants to get into this, how do you support them in that kind of exploration? Do you hire more and more faculty for this? Do you hire fewer in other areas? Do we see new fields appear, new subfields, new domains, new disciplines? On top of that, we have the challenge of trying to protect this and support it. What do you do when a faculty member is studying a biological site that is changing? So I live in Virginia, off the coast of Virginia, or a whole bunch of undersea sites. Well, they're changing because they're very sensitive to temperature. So what happens to a marine biologist who has to keep moving their site north and north in order to keep doing their work? What do you do if you're studying at an archive that can't be supported any longer because the wet bulb temperature is too great? And of course, how do you protect faculty from the politics of this, right? I mean, just me doing this work, I'm very nervous that I may get abused or attacked online or worse. How do you support faculty doing this? Now, that leads us to teaching. So as we get more and more interest in climate, how do we teach this? What disciplines will loom larger, and how do you do interdisciplinary work? I mean, just pick an area. Tom Hames lives in Texas. We want to think about the future of Texas over the next 30 years in the climate crisis. So we need to bring in the discipline of climate science. Okay. We also need to bring in Texas history. We also need to bring in poli-sci and sociology and economics just to get started, right? So how do you teach this? Do we have more and more interdisciplinary classes? And what if the pedagogies change? Do we have more project-based, more inquiry-based projects? Because that's a really good way of teaching this. Do we have more simulations and more games? Because those are good ways of modeling complex systems. And beyond that, what happens to our populations? You see, more and more of our students are going to come to us having had some form of climate trauma. How do we support them? And then do we help teach climate refugees? As people move out of wet bulb temperatures and away from oceans, what's our academic responsibility there? I've been talking about this like it's all of us sitting down quietly, making decisions that are considered. But at the same time, we may expect a lot of unrest. I mean, in society, of course, but also on our campuses. If you take a look at the demographics of climate interest, basically people over 40 don't see climate as a major issue at all. People under 25 see it as a leading one. I see this poster in a lot of protests, and it really, really sticks with me. You'll die of old age, we'll die of climate change. Look at her face. Look at the intensity there. That's a college student today. Greta Thunberg is 20. She's college age. Remember the protests in Europe where students were throwing paint on classic works of art to draw attention to climate change? Half of them were college students. So think about your campus. What will those students want? It's going to depend on the campus, of course. But what happens if if a student group says, you have a faculty member teaching petroleum engineering, that person is guilty of crimes against the earth. Are we ready for this? What happens when faculty and staff join in? You have groups like Scientist Rebellion. What happens when your biologist, or what happens when one of your chemists gets arrested for attacking the head of Exxon? I think this is going to be a lot more chaotic than we anticipate. And then we have what happens to us in the world, because we can't just hide behind our ivory tower walls. So, for example, do we have more faculty and staff and students act as public intellectuals, taking a real public role to encourage the world to think and learn about this, sharing their information that they derive from research? Do we actually try and lead mitigation efforts? So do we lobby governments, for example? Do we negotiate with companies in order to improve their carbon footprint? What happens to the local town-gown relationship? Do we, for example, partner with local community effort to put in new solar panels? Or what happens when a campus is greener than its community, or vice versa? And then do we participate in larger projects still? So I showed you that map of the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Gulf rising. Well, some cities are already planning on this. Boston and New York City are each planning huge efforts to poke into the water to protect them. Does a campus, for example, contribute electrical engineering professors to help wire them up? Do students go there for service learning? What is the role of higher education in this greatest crisis of all? And if we look back in time, World War II, the Civil War, the 1960s, we saw campuses involved deeply with all of these efforts. Is that what we're expecting now? All right, I'm going to wrap things up and start thinking about getting some more of your questions here. And one of the things I found that COVID taught us is a kind of dry run for climate change. It gave us a look back at at how we can cut emissions. Remember how in the spring of 2020, people in Los Angeles could actually see the sky for the first time ever? Same in Beijing, right? We may also see the climate activism play a role in how international our campuses are, because international cooperation is a great way to do this. At the same time, people who resist climate activism tend to be very local. Now, before I go off into the last bit, I want to make sure I grab some of your comments and questions here. Antoinette points out that equitable access is a key factor, indeed. Joel asks for a carbon tax. Yes, the carbon tax is a very powerful tool. We're just resisting it like crazy, it seems, in the US. Yulia, I don't know the donut academia proposal. I'll make a point of taking a look at that. If it's referring to donut economics, this brings up another question, if I may. If the world changes its approach to, well, how the world works based on climate change, think about, for example, if we think that capitalism as it stands today is responsible for climate change, let's rethink capitalism. Well, if we do that, and that's a huge if, but if we follow something like degrowth economics or donut economics, think about the impacts on higher education, from funding to how we support ourselves. Tom Hames mentions we need to look at the university organically. True, quite true. Will, thank you for that nice thought. Mary Faria says, this is an unbelievable opportunity for higher education. The new disciplines that will emerge. Absolutely. I mean, think about climate change mitigation as a whole discipline, or as a field. Climate engineering, for example. Amanda Avery says, well, few of these problems are tackled intentionally or proactively. I fear we react and respond, but that's about it. Amanda, I have these days too. In fact, every day, it's like that. But we now have the ability to do something better in higher education. I mean, we have this extraordinary capacity to think, and to think for time, and also to bring to bear all of the intellectual horsepower of higher education. I mean, nobody else on earth is better suited to address the climate crisis than us. We have the chance to really take the lead and to encourage other people to follow. That's my hope. Tom points out that Texas will be the forefront of climate change effects. Its political systems are fundamentally conservative and won't adapt to change. This is true. I would point out that while Texas is pumping out tons of oil and shipping it, it also has a lot of renewable energy installed. There are a lot of solar plants and a lot of wind turbines. Jarek says, what about integrated everything that we teach? The slogan I have, Jarek, is climate change is the new liberal arts. Raymond is even darker than I am. So that's quite a feat, Raymond. So the college's biggest challenge in the decades to follow will be attracting enough students to stay open. Take a look at my chapter called Best and Worst Case. I think you'll appreciate that. Jarek asks us to think about some classic educational content. Vicky wonders if faculty become more risk averse as tenure continues to erode. Quite true. We have more questions about artificial intelligence. Okay, I'm going to race ahead a little bit. If we take all these trends and we just really hit fast forward on them, what are some of the things we might expect? And one of them is improving quality of teaching. Now, this is something every country has. No country stops and says, you know, we're good enough at high school, at our higher education teaching. Everyone wants more and wants to be better. And your group here does some work in that. And also, you know, this is what the pandemic showed, a lot of bad online teaching. So we want to improve that and we want to make that better. One way of doing that might be increasing support for student care. So you should know that the US is an outlier on this. Most nations do not have the standard of care that we do. They have very little in that way. They don't really have a student life function anywhere near what we do have. But maybe we need to do more of a kind of whole 360-degree care for students, their mental health, support them in social activism. You know, the Jesuit traditions, cura personalis, we may do that. In order to attract and retain students, we may have to make things more caring, more supportive. We continue to see our curricula change. And again, I'm not seeing a lot of ways forward for the humanities and arts. I do think STEM and business will continue to ratchet up, but with the climate crisis, that gives us new opportunities for new curricula. We have a big question in terms of student data, which we can circle back to, but right now, I'm fascinated by how divided academia is. On the one hand, we have people who say this is the Moneyball model. We can use all kinds of data to help students succeed. We have lots of great examples of this. Opposing them are people who say this is intrusive, this is Orwellian, it risks all kinds of harm, from misdiagnosing student outcomes to losing student data. And these two sides don't really meet in the middle. So we should expect more of that kind of battle. We also have emerging technologies that I haven't talked about. I mean, one of them is the combination of augmented and virtual reality, which you could call extended reality or mixed reality. What you're looking at here is a fantastic project. It's not pretty dated. You're looking at through a Microsoft HoloLens, where you're seeing a protein molecule visualized, overlaid on top of somebody else's office. The person interacts with this molecule by their gestures and by their voice, and they get to learn a lot about the details of that molecule, which is pretty amazing. Well, how do we support this on campus? This requires a lot It requires changing our infrastructure so that we have better bandwidth. We have to support hardware as well as software. We have to train faculty in order to use this stuff. Plus, we have to have more VR content for education. Well, this is a whole world to think about. Meanwhile, without any fuss, without any media attention really, our open revolution continues. We keep producing more educational resources that are free and open. We keep producing more open access scholarship. We keep sharing more of our teaching. But at some point down the road, we're going to say that we are mostly open, at least in our textbooks, which would be pretty amazing. If we wrap these up and go forward a little further, you want to think about how higher education's footprint might shrink. We might have fewer campuses, fewer programs, fewer students, fewer faculty and staff. We may also be more digital, just more immersed in digital technology, more practice, and with some interesting downsides. We may see some students de-skilled socially because they're mostly online. And we should not expect this to be done nicely or easily. We're still dealing with long COVID. We're still dealing with economic stress and anxiety, social and political unrest. I mean, hey, I'm just half an hour from DC on a good day, right? I'm a little bit biased, but I don't think it's crazy to say that America is right now very polarized and in danger of political upset. Plus, we have generational tensions of all kinds. So you think about this century, and we think about it as the military calls it, VUCA, a volatile time, one that's uncertain, one that's also very complex, and whose processes and outcomes are ambiguous. That's the future for higher education. Our models that we've had can continue to serve to some degree, but we really need to think about what happens to colleges and universities in this VUCA world that we've been outlining. Now, I'm cautious or conscious of the fact that this can seem daunting. And some of you are already pretty dark in your imagination. You know, Simon Hansen looking to decline of tenure. Tom is terrified by his state. Raymond Galinsky is worried that colleges will have to stay open. I want to give you some of the optimistic ways that we can think about the future. And one of them is I think we should honor our students and do more with them, not just at them. If you think about our student experience, if we think about traditional age students, they've lived through a completely bizarre century. You know, the financial crash of 2008 was in their childhood. You think about growing up in the pandemic, much less the Trump era. And these students are creative as all get out, and they're doing a lot of work. I think we should welcome them into our councils as we redesign higher education. Just on the right, by the way, is a student of mine who just blew me away. She's Chinese from Wuhan. And in 2020, I was teaching a class with her, and her family was infected, and she didn't want to go home. She wanted to finish her work. She was also pregnant and gave birth that April and did not want to stop working. Students like that, that's what keeps us going, right? Second point is collaboration. I mean, this group here is based in collaboration, so it's kind of redundant to tell you that, but we know how to collaborate. We have all kinds of ways of doing it. The more we collaborate, the more we learn from each other, the more we share, the better. It's not easy. We're also doing this in a time when we're rededicated teaching and learning. I mean, the most cynical view I can think of this is that if our quantity of students declines, then we want to make sure their quality of their experience increases. I'm happy with that. I think having colleges and universities spending more effort on improving teaching, I don't see a downside. I want to see more of that. And we're doing this with an increasing sense of social justice and equity. And isn't it about time? I've given you a lot of details, as well as some big picture views. I want to leave you with one image of the future that just keeps coming back to me. This is from an Indian writer, Arundhati Roy. And she was writing about the pandemic, but what she says speaks to how we approach the future. She had a metaphor that I don't think anyone else has really used. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through it lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. I love that spirit, and I want to pass it on to you. Now, if you want to find out more of my own work, here are a couple of links. Futureeducation.us is where you can see a lot of my research. And here's me on Twitter. But let me stop throwing slides at you. Let me stop with all this. Let me see some more faces. And now you can see my shaggy, hairy face, in case you forgot what I looked like. I want to have more discussion and conversation, but Jarek, can I grab some of the chat comments first?
Please, by all means, go right ahead, of course.
There's a, let's see, where are we? There's questions that came up here about how to make ourselves relevant to the solution. And this is a great point, Tom, is trying to make sure that the rest of the world pays attention to this. The last two COP meetings, higher education didn't come up at all. The IPCC report mentioned higher education really briefly. So we need to really make a case for ourselves. Belinda, I don't know if you have access to the microphone and video, but I'd love to hear about you in the Cayman Islands. What are you all thinking? What are you all planning? And if you can't talk out loud, just type in the chat. I'll be happy to read that out loud. See, I'm putting people on the spot, right? Jarek says that education is a function of society. Has any education ever been a leader anywhere? You know, my favorite example of this, actually, which is not a great example, is from the 1848 revolutions in Europe, where the students, the University of Vienna, actually stormed the legislature, took over the government. That's an extreme example, but you can think about the 1960s, where so much of the social unrest, so much of the political transformation was driven by students and by faculty, their research and ideas going out into the world. We have that capacity. Plus, we have this great power of teaching students and shaping the next generation. I think that's the way in which we are a leader. Natalia Zagulo, hello. Recording slide. I don't know about the recording. Jarek can tell you about that. I can share the slides right away. No problem. And thank you for your very, very kind words. I point you to my books. They're more traditional way of seeing this. Rupali Mukherjee says, how do you make sure that other countries also make an effort to improve climates in their countries? Rupali, this is the great problem. It's a huge problem right now. And it's one that really depresses me because of what I saw in COVID. America can't do it alone, right? Same thing with China, same thing with India. This requires a really historic level of international collaboration, which we're not really seeing. I mean, I mentioned the geopolitical divide between the US and China. That does not augur well for this, not at all. And the pandemic showed that we were much more nationalistic than internationalist. Remember how many nations came with their own vaccines? The US, Britain, Russia, China, and how we separate ourselves really quickly. That really worries me. I think we need, people in this field talk about different mechanisms like a rebooted United Nations or some kind of transnational authority, but it really requires that kind of collaboration in general for this to work. You're absolutely right. Joel, I don't know that, I'm not sure that price might be right. I haven't checked that. The hardcover I think is $39.95. That looks like it's stuck for the next month or so. I don't know how that'll change. I do have a 30% off coupon I can give you though, a code for that if you like. Just let me know in the chat and I'll type it in. Joel points out a good point too about ebooks, that buying books on Kindle instead of paper helps reduce the carbon footprint. Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things we have to think about is, do we become more digital in order to become better in this changing climate? And then let's see, Jarek shows HoloLens, very, very good. And Antoinette mentioned zero cost textbooks. Absolutely. It's amazing. I talked to faculty about zero cost textbooks and they're like, I don't know if that's a good idea. I talk to students like, get these now. We need these right now. We need to have these. Will Roberts says that Arthur Levine contends that CBE will become the predominant model in the near future, especially if programs lead directly to careers. I'm not sure. Well, I mean, CBE, a lot of academics really dislike it in different ways. We're not good about supporting it. But it depends on how we measure it and how we declare it. One thing that happens is that people will often go to college to do something other than what they have CBE in. But people who want to upskill themselves within their field, people with a bachelor's degree want to get a master's degree, that kind of thing, CBE can become more and more important. If enrollment keeps declining, we should expect to see more CBE too. Joel points out that several states are banning justice and equity. Yeah, the politics of this are nightmarish. And they're getting worse and worse. It looks like next year's presidential campaign, as well as congressional campaigns, will probably take DEI front and center. Jen mentions the Missouri law. Missouri's legislature, Jen, is going really strange. They're really out on the right edge right now. Thanks, Amanda, for sharing that link. Bethany says that in the California community college system, they're working on a resolution for the ASCCC spring plenary on academic freedom in terms of DEI. Oh, good. Bethany, if you have a link for that, please share it. That's good to see. And Tom points out, like I said, my example wasn't very good because 1848 did not end well for those students. Quite true. Belinda, oh, thank you for answering. I'm sorry you can't unmute. Says she's wondering about her future. There are only 60,000 of you and depend on the government for funding. Absolutely, Belinda. You think of the Maldives, you think about all the low-lying parts of bigger countries that are right on the ocean, like the whole edge of Bangladesh, which is right on the sea and often below sea level. You think, okay, here are the options. You can try and protect yourselves with, again, I mentioned before, building walls. A problem with walls, not so much for you in the Caymans, is that you have to keep building the wall, or else the edges of it, water will rise and slop over the sides. So let's just say you build a wall around New York City. Okay, you protect that, but the water is still out there, so it's going to slosh onto Long Island or New Jersey. Or do you elevate buildings? The U.S. Naval Academy just did this with their library because appropriately the Naval Academy is on the water's edge, but they're actually elevated and they're building a wall. So that's another option. Or do you move? And this is what people in the Maldives are talking about, the possibility of having to move their entire nation. A lot of people in Micronesia are talking about this. Amanda, thank you for sharing the link to the recordings. And Tom has fun by talking about not servant leadership, but subversive leadership. And we have a lot of people. Oh, Jarek asks, the only thing that we have in common with those who attacked Capitol Hill on January 6th is education. What went wrong? I don't see enough educators talking about this, Jarek. I see educators talking about how awesome education is and how it makes people more humane. I mean, because I'm a grim person at times, I like to point out how Nazi Germany was incredibly well educated. That's the kind of thing where we aren't a magic, wand that makes people more humane. We can really be the opposite at times. And that's part of what we do. In fact, the history of higher education, think about the US and the US Civil War. We had colleges shut down so that their students and faculty could dive in and fight on both sides. So, what do you do with that? How do you, I don't think we are that perfect. I think we actually really just do have a lot of capacity for generating different outputs in higher education. We can work to make that better, which is something we probably should be doing. Here, I'm going to put in the chat a little discount here. If you type this into the catalog page, Johns Hopkins will give you 30% off, which is nice. Joel, I think that applies to the ebook. Please let me know if it doesn't. Here's a link to that. Belinda adds that her island is low-lying, the highest point 60 feet above sea level. So higher buildings is one way. And Yulia points out that AI is the mirror of humanity. I think, Yulia, that's such a beautiful observation. It's one of the things that worries me about how people approach technology. We don't see that reflection. It's easy for us to blame technology for what we are and what we do. So we really bear that in mind. I'm thinking I don't want to, Bethany, thank you for that link. If you please feel free to share that to me by email. If anyone wants to bug me by email, it's easy to do so. That's my address. and I will be happy to answer. It sometimes takes me a while to answer, but I will. So that's it for the chat. In the Padlet, there were a bunch of questions, if I remember rightly. Jarek, would you like me to tackle a few of these and bring them up?
Yes, that would be fantastic. Thank you, Bryan.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, thinking about AI, we have this one quote here: the increasing use of AI and automation in the workplace is expected to lead to a displacement of jobs, which could have a significant impact on higher education systems. Higher education institutions will need to adapt their curricula to prepare students for the changing job market and provide them with the skills needed for the jobs of the future. This is absolutely right. And let me just unfold that a little bit more. There are my three different futures for automation. Whichever path we take, we need to prepare for that and follow that. So if we want to prepare students for that kind of cyborg world, who was I picking on? I was picking on Bethany, right? So if you want to be Bethany 2.0, who's going to be that mix of automation and human, we have to train students for that. We have to prepare them for that, starting early on. Another thing we can do is teach them to be critical about this stuff, to be able to measure all kinds of things, like who owns the technologies, who is hailed by the technologies, and who is excluded from the technologies. And that's something which we know how to do, and it can really do at scale. Another thing to think about too is just how many jobs will involve technology and how that changes, which means we have to think about teaching students to be nimble. This is where liberal education really comes in. All the Padlets have Amanda Tainter's name on them. Amanda, if you wrote all of these, that's fantastic.
I think they're all, I put them in for Jarek.
Amanda's the best.
Well, Amanda is great.
It's a team effort.
Yes, no, Jarek could probably expand on the questions. I was the scribe at this point.
Well, you're a fantastic scribe. Let me add the next AI question that you scribed up, because this is really a biggie. AI raises ethical questions that need to be addressed. One is the potential for AI to be biased in decision-making processes, such as admissions or grading. Institutions need to ensure that AI is used in a fair, unbiased manner that is transparent and accountable. What about equity? So this is a huge issue, and I recommend a very quick and powerful book on the subject, which has the second best title of a book published in the 21st century, which is Weapons of Math Destruction, written by Cathy O'Neill. And she did a great, if you want to ask me about the first best title, no one else agrees with me on it, but this is it's a great book. And she points out in the book just that the gathering of data, the collection of data, the manipulation, identification of data, before we get to the automation part, that is fraught with bias. You can think about things like, thanks Amanda for sharing the link to it. You think about stuff like polling, where how do you figure out who to poll? Do you deal with mobile devices, mobile phones, that kind of thing? Think about pollsters for politics who may go door to door and ignore some neighborhoods or spend too much time in familiar neighborhoods. Plus, the older the data gets, the more biased it tends to be. When you think about medical studies right now, so much of modern medicine is based on assuming the typical patient is male. Well, it's kind of a stupid mistake to make, right? A kind of blind thing, but it's still there. We have so much inherited medical knowledge that's based on that. So all of that data, then how we use it, we have to be careful to make sure it's not biased. And there are 1,000 ways this can happen too. A great book by Ruha Benjamin called The New Jim Code it does a really, really good job of this, of looking into the details of this. So we really have to be careful about it. Yes, Amanda, I'm a big audio fan, constantly listening to Audible, always listening to podcasts. My Academia Next is available as an audiobook, and it's not read by me. And it's always weird for me to listen to that. But there are a lot of other issues we have to think about when it comes to ethics in AI. For example, there are some really interesting studies. Oh, Tom mentions facial recognition software. It's only trained on white males. Yeah, a real problem. A lot of facial recognition software has problems the darker the skin. But there's some interesting research taking a look at people in mental health institutions and how they use social media to look to see if there was any hint about self-harm or suicidal ideation in them. And it wasn't just looking for signs of saying, I want to kill myself. It was trying to use a lot of data and analyze it and pin it down to locations where someone did end up harming themselves, to look at that data for flags and indicators. Okay. They came up with a model that was, I can get the number wrong, something like 85% accurate. Right? If you looked at someone's social media file before they did something, you could, with 85% accuracy or so, pick out someone that was likely to hurt themselves. What a great tool, right? What a great opportunity to really get care to somebody and maybe save lives. But that 15%, I wonder about. 15% they miss. Or how about the ones that weren't going to harm themselves, but you intervene and encourages them to harm themselves? What's the ethical question here? I mean, the more you look at automation, the more complex this gets. Right now I've trained ChatGPT to run role-playing games for me, partly for fun, but also partly for teaching. I have a teacher training for me, where it puts me in charge of a classroom. I get to respond. This is great. I think this is really, really good pedagogy. It's really, really interesting. But I'm not using real people. So am I losing something? Am I losing some kind of training from this? We have to think about this really carefully. Amanda is reading my bookshelf. You got to stop doing that. I actually have an online book club, and we went through Zuboff's book, which is really, really important. Jen, you said cyberpunk. Which book, or do you mean the new game, Cyberpunk 2077? So in other words, I think AI right now has all kinds of issues about this. All the Padlet goes on to talk about AI and accessibility. And this is another major problem, because we're not great about accessibility in general, even though, oh, Jen, that's so cool. That's so cool. I would love to hear more about that. But we have to think about, how we make our content accessible in a better way. Do we embrace universal design for learning? Do we have more and more options for people who are restricted by sight or restricted by sound? So that's another key issue for AI. I have 2:58 on my clock on the Eastern Coast. Jarek, I think I've blown past your 2-hour limit here. I want to hear other voices from people.
Right. Yes, those 2 hours, Bryan, flew by. I just got so lost in the issues you're discussing. It's just truly amazing. I just cannot be more grateful for your presence, for your time, for sharing of your expertise. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.